All right, good morning. This is the fifth grade. This is page 4. This is going to be numbers 1 and 2, possibly a little more. We'll see how far we get on this video. So we're going to go through some of these, and I will ask you to pause the video at times and then to try and answer questions. Then I will have some of these problems answered so you can check your work. So we're going to look at this first one. Number 1 says the decimal grid in each model represents one whole. Just going to grab a pen here. So that's one whole. Shade each model to show the decimal number below the model. So for example, here's our whole, this first big square, and inside here you'll notice there are 10 squares in each row. There are 10 rows. So inside this there are 100 parts, and the same thing over here. Below, however, is the decimal is 5/10, which means 5 out of 10 parts to make a whole. That's what 5/10, and there's the decimal form of 5/10. So when you look up here, 5/10 would mean we'd have to break up this whole into just 10 parts, and you could do that by circling each one of these columns. There would be 1 part, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I could keep circling, and we would see that there would be 10 columns of 10. And I've just circled 5 of those 10 columns, and that would be 5/10. So in order to show that, I would just highlight that. So this is what we would do. You would just highlight that in. I'll take these off. And we'll highlight 5/10. So 1 row, 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's how you would show 5/10. Let's go over to 500ths. So in this case, for 500ths, I've got 100 parts in here. So literally, I'm talking about 500ths literally means 5 over 100. Or out of 100 parts to make a whole, I'm only interested in 5 parts. I would just count out 5 parts. 3, 4, 5. I think that's got it. And so all this lesson is showing you, well, here's a visual. This is what 500ths looks like. It obviously looks like much less. So then if you want to compare those, this is very important. You could say, well, how much less is that? Well, there's only 5 of these. So if I were to try to go over here and find out how many groups of 5 that I could circle in here, I would find that there would be 10 groups of 5. So we could do that. We could look through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So if you come down here, this question says 500ths is how much of 5/10? Well, it's only, this is 500ths. It's only 1 part. It's only 1 part out of 10 groups of 5. So it's 500ths is 1/10, we could say, of 5/10. And then you could look at it the other way and say, well, 5/10 is how many times the value of 500ths. So you have 5. I have 1 of these here. So how many times greater is this? So you could say, well, how many of these groups of 5 does it take to make 5/10? The answer is it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm sort of counting across 6, 7, 8, 9. It takes 10. So it's 10 times the size. And really what this gets us into is what it means to compare place values. So I'm gonna pause this real fast and go to a different page. And we're just going to look at a place value chart because I think a place value chart is just much easier to look at. Okay, so if you look at a place value chart, it's so much easier to understand, I think, because you learned in 2nd grade that when you take, if I take tenths and if I have 10 tenths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that you can bundle those, and 10 of those you learned you can shift it over, makes 1, 1. In other words, 10 times, that's 10 times the number of tenths, shifts my value over to the ones. And it works the opposite way too. If I want to say, well, going from ones If I want to go back and unbundle, then I would say, well, I would divide this. I can unbundle that, and it becomes 10 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In other words, I just divided it into 10 parts. So what you want to take note of is times 10 shifts values to the next place value over, times 10. Divide by 10 shifts them back. So what does that do for our problem? Let's erase this. I think it's super easy to think about this. They want us to compare 5/10 and 5/100, right? So here is, for example, the first question we'll go back to is 5/10. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I think it's 5/100. So we'll go back here. Okay. So here's 5/100. Here's how we write the decimal form of 5/100. And so 5/100, how does that relate to 5/10? Well, 5/10 is over here. So 5/100, or 5/10, I should say, 5/10 is 10 times the value of 5/100. That would shift that 5/100 over to the tens place. Times 10 shifts any value over to the next place value. That's the relationship. And then we could also say that 5/100, if I divide 5/10 by 10, that would shift me back to 5/100. Whoops. Don't want the decimal there, sorry. Okay. So how do these things relate? Here's what we're saying. We're saying here, I'm going to come over here, 5/100 times 10 is 5/10. Or 5/10 is 10 times this amount. Okay? 5/100 is 1/10, we'll just do 1/10 as large as 5/10. And don't let this kind of confuse you. 1/10 times something is the same as, it's probably easier just to think of it as 5/10 divided by 10 equals. So again, think of this. All you think of is shifting. This is the easiest way to think of it. Times 10 equals the number shifts and it becomes greater. Greater place value. Divide by 10, the number shifts and it becomes a smaller place value. So let's go see how that works. Let's pause this. Okay, so now we're down on this section here, and this is where we're going to just think of shifting. We're just going to make it really easy. So we're going from 5/10 divided by something equals 5/100. So we're shifting from tenths to hundredths. That number is getting smaller, and it's shifting a place value. That's just divide by 10. The other one, 5/100 times something equals 5/10. So think back to the place value chart. We're going from hundredths, which is a smaller place value. We're going one more place value over. One more, that means just times 10. And that should be a review. Okay, let's pause and go down to the number 2. Okay, this time they're going to ask you to think about tenths, the relationship between tenths and hundredths, and this is just on a number line. It says, draw a number line from 0 to 2, then draw and label the points at 2 and 2/10. Okay, so we would start with 0. At the very end is 2. Halfway in between would be 1. And they're asking us to find 2/10. So we want to be able to label the tenths in between, which means there will be 10 spaces. So we'll count the space. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. There's 10 spaces now. 2/10, this first one would be 1/10. Right here would be our 2/10. And the same thing over to here. This would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So to give you an idea, this would be 1 and 1/10, 1 and 2/10, 1 and 3/10, 1 and 4/10, and right here would be 1 and 5/10. And then they're asking us, well, use the number line to explain why 2 is 10 times the value of 2/10. Again, much easier to think about that place value chart. Think about the place value chart. 2 is in the ones place, and then here's the ones. And right over next to that ones place is the tenths. Easiest to think of is to say that this 2/10, I would have to multiply that times 10 to have it to shift it over to the next place value. In other words, 2 is 10 times greater. But let's see what they want us to do. Let's do it on the number line. We can show another way to look at it. Here's 2 out here. And these spaces, this actually represents 2/10. Because when you look on the number line, we're thinking about these spaces. There's 1/10 and 2/10. All right, so how many groups of 2 will it take to get all the way up to 2? Well, let's do that. There's one group, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And again, I'm circling groups of 2, 9, 10. So how many groups of 2/10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Again, there's another way of showing that 2 is 10 times the value of 2/10. 2/10 times 10 equals 2. Okay, so down here, complete the equations. Again, here we're going from tenths, going over one more place value to the ones place. That's a shift of 1, that's times 10. Now we were going to go from the ones to the tenths place, which where are we shifting? Shifting it to a lower place value, so we're dividing, and again, one space means just divide by 10. Which type of model do you like best and why? So just respond to that. My personal choice is I just like the place value chart. The place value chart that I showed you earlier I think is just the easiest way to do that. But you could think back to the number line. Think back to what we just looked at also. We can kind of scroll back there, I think. There's your other choice, is using the decimal or the 100 square models there, the whole broken up, the decimal grid. So your two choices are the decimal grid or the number line. But if you want to talk about the place value chart, I would think that would be appropriate as well. Okay, we're going to take a look at our next thing. So we're going to pause this. Okay, and actually I'm going to stop there. So that was page 4. I will put page 5 on the next video, so it'll try to make them a little bit shorter. And again, now you can go back and reference this. Again, the big thing to take away from this lesson today is what is the relationship between ones, the ones place value, the tenths place value, and hundreds. What's the relationship between these? And the relationship is, the key is times 10. That moves you from one smaller place value to the next larger. Divide by 10 simply moves that number from a larger place value to a smaller place value. Again, that concept of shifting is just so easy. Once you kind of wrap your head around that place value chart, it will allow you to do all kinds of multiplication. All right, thank you very much. We will see you on the next video.